topic is called My CRM's a Mess. Let's fix that. So oftentimes, your database, your CRM, your, central location for all your contact information and all of your clients' interaction with your brand, your whole entire business is on that. So it's really important to dedicate the time and the resources to make sure that it's good and ready and in good working order, so that way in the moment you're really successful. And I really don't know anyone who's better than at this than Stephanie. Stephanie is an all-out pro when it comes to CRM, practice management, best practices, just technology stacks in general. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Stephanie, let her introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Nora, for the warm introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. And if you're going to be watching the recording later, welcome. So as Nora was saying, today we're going to be mainly focusing on the CRM and then how can we leverage Precise FP to have a more efficient practice. So here's today's agenda. So I'm going to start off with some introductions of who I am and my industry experience. Then we're going to dive into why clean data matters. So why clean data within the CRM makes a difference between Precise FP and then all your other software within your tech stack. Then we're going to review data that is essential versus optional. Then we're going to highlight CRM mapping, as well as some use cases of looking at workflows. And then we're going to round it out with some templates and searches and then open it up for Q&A. But as Nora was mentioning, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to add them into the chat. I told Nora before this, I always love having an open conversation. So yes, I will follow this agenda, but at the same time, I want it to be interactive. So feel free to add your questions into the chat. All right, so a little bit about me. So my name is Stephanie. Been in the industry for about a decade or so. Started out in operations under a broker-dealer and then worked my way up to be an advisor, at which point in 2020, I made the decision to take a step back and spend more time with my family. I now have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old who keep me quite busy, but I love them. And, I do this for them. So I want to make sure that I have built a business that revolves around, their schedules and their lives, so that way I can spend as much time as I can with them. But one thing I did really enjoy when I was an advisor was the technology. I was always intrigued on how best to use the CRM. How can we leverage workflows? How can we be able to tap into all the different features within financial planning software? How can we be better at Tamarack? How can we be better at Precise FP? And so what I found is that a lot of other advisors really wanted that support as well. So that's where this business has grown, is a way for me to help financial advisors within specifically Redtail and Wealthbox CRM. So I help build out workflows, task templates, reports, pretty much anything within the system. Help integrate, calendar, Precise FP, for example, and some others. And so really just making sure that you're leveraging the software as best you can. And then also training. So I am launching in this next week a training program for both Redtail and Wealthbox users. So if you're interested, feel free to navigate to my website. But I will also be sharing with Nora those details as well. So I have in there a 90-day training program for new users, so that way that can be taken off of your plate. I also help out with migrations as well. So with Wealthbox and Redtail, if you're migrating to those platforms, I help as your liaison between the CRM platform and your team to make sure that the mapping has been identified and make sure that that comes over properly. And then there's quite a few features that just can't be built out and migrated natively. So therefore, I'm able to jump in and then translate your processes into your desired CRM. So for example, if you have a bunch of workflows that you've already designed and you want to make sure that those get translated and built out in an even better way within your new CRM, that's something that I can help you with. I also want to lastly, highlight that I'm a resource partner. So Precise FP recently released a list of resource partners that are available to you to reach out to and have as a resource. So definitely make sure to highlight that next time we talk. All right.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. So having that liaison that's like, listen, I've seen this, I've done this, I know what happens, rather than just, the sales rep on the phone trying to tell you that the migration will be okay, has to be so helpful. That's awesome.
Definitely. And yeah, I always highlight best practices, and just with all the firms that I've worked with, just figuring out, okay, from most of the advisors, what makes the most sense. And I always like those kind of harder problems, trying to figure out how can we leverage the system beyond services such as AUM management and financial planning. If you're doing 401k management or alternatives, how can we leverage the system to be more efficient for your specific practice? I really lead with offering custom approaches to the system. Yes, there are best practices, but I want to make sure that the system is working for you versus the other way around. So yeah, definitely, Nora, echoing everything that you mentioned. So yeah, next we're going to go into the Clean Data Matters section of our presentation. So really where I start with most of my clients is a health check. So similarly to going to a doctor, I always go into their system, figure out what's going on, looking at duplicates, looking at information that is missing. I look at how many templates you're utilizing, look at workflows, overdue tasks, and that sort, just to get a real baseline of what's going on within your system. And more often than not, I see a lot of CRMs that just don't have clean data. And what's a bummer is that when that happens, then you can't really leverage other technologies and just really be able to, offer that better client service that you're looking for. So I always say, I always describe the CRM as a pyramid. So at the bottom, the most important, the foundation is the contact management part of the system. And then the second tier are your processes, so your tasks, your workflows and such. And then the third tier of the pyramid is your reporting, your automations, kind of your, cherry on top, just to make sure that the system is working as efficiently as possible for you. But without clean data, the system doesn't work for you. Workflows can't work. Making sure the clean data is in there. You're able to search a lot easier. Making sure all your clients have the right classification, having all of that information clean and up to date can really be able to streamline your processes and your client service. As I mentioned here, confident client communication. So that way you're delivering and you're being more proactive rather than reactive. Nora, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that does take front end work, and that's so great that you can step in and help out, because you want to think about your end goal a lot of the times, where, maybe you want to send a communication out for Father's Day coming up and say Happy Father's Day to everyone who's a parent. Well, how in the world do you cast a net over everyone who's a parent and then who's a male? If you think about that first, where, I'm going to want to do that eventually, then now you can start to create those keywords and start to build out that search. So that way, when it is Father's Day, it's just a quick grab of everyone.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, so just having that clean data, just it's the downstream. Without having that, the rest of it doesn't really work. And then you're able to really, again, deliver that great client service by having all that, and then your searches and everything work.
Yeah, and don't feel guilty. I know, starting off with duplicates is a great example. Most
Hmm.
CRMs will have a duplicates contact report, and you might pull that up, and there might be two there, there might be 2,000 there. And
Hmm.
it happens, things get duplicated in migrations, things like that happen. But just making sure that you go in and clean those up will make your day-to-day happier for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, and I always say at a bare minimum once a year, try and build a system into your processes so that way you can review that information from a global level. But then I always encourage, and it's kind of a sneak peek to the rest of the presentation, but I always really enjoy making sure that everyone has a process set up when they meet with a client to double check all the information that you have. Because I found it's just a lot easier if you take a bite-sized approach to it, where each client gets their information reviewed during the client review. It's a lot quicker and a lot easier than having to say I have a book of 200-300 households that now I have to carve out this time or bring in an intern or be able to sit down and actually go through all of those different, essential versus optional information that we're about to go through. But just to make sure that everything is up to date, phone numbers, emails, people move all the time. So we want to make sure that all that information is as up to date as possible. But that's, I guess, my little tip is when you go through the client review process, try and carve out some time. And then again, we'll kind of utilize Precise FP for this instance, but just carving out some time to be able to go through with the client and validate all that information and seeing if there's maybe new keywords that are now appropriate for them. Maybe now they do have a family, a newborn in the last 6 months since you've seen them. So really making sure that you're staying on top of that client service aspect of it. Anything else, Nora, you wanted to add?
No, I think that's great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So yeah, so now we're going to transition into essential versus optional data. So, as long as we have all of the information in the CRM clean, really what we're looking to make sure is really clean are the essential data points and then the optional. So here's just a handful. We really want to make sure that we have the full name, nicknames, especially. Some people I'm sure on this call know that there are certain clients that want to be named their nickname. So you got to make sure that that's in there. Make sure you got your phone numbers, your emails, the birthdays, especially if we are mailing out, either birthday cards physically or email. Making sure the client service model is also put into the system. With Redtail, you have the category. With Wolfbox, you create either a tag or a custom field. Really making sure the household is also connected. So both of those platforms, and I know other CRMs, you can build out the household, make sure that all of the members are connected and identify what their relationship is to that household. I always say once a child has become 18, you always want to make them a separate household. But during that transition, there's a lot of opportunity for planning and reaching out to the client. So that's just, again, something where it's great to be able to identify the household and then ways for you to be proactive with those clients. And then compliance related relevant information, right? So we want to track when we've sent the ADV. We want to make sure now with the form CRS, make sure all the Reg BI information is saved in there, as well as their preferred method of communication and their review frequency. So typically the review frequency would go hand in hand, of course, with the client type or the tier. But then really for that preferred communication as well, making sure that, if they prefer phone or email, I know certain, clients prefer one or the other. So it's really great to be able to document that within the CRM. So that way anyone on your team understands exactly how to communicate with that client. And you don't have a bad situation happen where you miscommunicate with the client. But then some optional great information to keep in the CRM is really, to me, more the qualitative aspects of the relationship. So, some examples that we always like to throw out are like pets' names and their favorite vacation and their hobbies. A lot of times what's great about the optional information is also to be able to collectively bring people together on interests. So say you have a bunch of people that are interested in wine or traveling or golf. It's a great way to be able to grab all those people together and then through those saved searches to be able to either take action. So if you have a golf tournament for your clients, or if you are sending out some sort of a notification, broadcast email, for example, notifying someone about some sort of update, it's a great way to be able to collectively bring people together. As well as some fun facts or how they take their coffee. Now people are starting to transition back into the office. So a lot of these in-person type of items that we're tracking are now coming back into the CRM. A lot of times during 2020, in the last couple of years, they've kind of migrated out. But I've seen a lot more firms now bringing those back in just because it is great to know, do they like coffee? Do they like tea? What is their preference when they come in the office? So yeah, Nora, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but really making sure that you distinguish those essential versus optional data points for your firm.
Yes, and it's seriously so helpful to go through this because there's hundreds of fields in a CRM. I know everyone has opened up a CRM record and been like, what in the world? This is like an endless scroll, or there's a bunch of tabs on the left that I can click on. I just want to know the driver's license number or, these five things. And I feel like that's what you do really well is, maybe you get a study guide for a test and the study guide is like 15 pages long. Well, Stephanie's really good at being like, okay, I'm going to go through and highlight what's going to actually be on the test.
Yeah.
Because you're really good at, the DNA type of information, this essential information that's listed, especially with Precise FP. She can help you make those fields mandatory. So that way, those are the things that a client has to fill out in order to move forward. And then maybe the things that are optional can be sent as a follow-up or a second engagement. So that way it's more digestible and someone's not really going through those warm and fuzzy questions when they're just trying to open up an account very quickly. But just being very clear and communicative with your clients on this front can really help, where it's saying, it was great to work with you, great to meet you. By the time you get home today, I'm going to have something in your inbox that's going to gather this essential information. And you might even call it, the DNA of client information. So that way you can get going with your things and then start to build things from there. But I think having a baseline of, this is the level of customer service that we're offering, these are the fields that we're gathering, is really going to add a lot of order to the chaos.
Definitely. Yeah, and what I've seen a lot of firms do, and I've helped with this, is to have essentially a glossary internally. So not really client facing, but what are those key data points that you have deemed as essential? So that way internally, especially as you bring on new team members, they know exactly what data is coming in. Granted, you're probably going to put most of it into that precise FP form, but it's nice to also have that as either a working Word document or Google Doc or a PDF saved into your file structure, whether you use OneDrive or SharePoint, but just something where you have all that information listed. So that way, again, if someone is out on maternity leave or vacation or isn't there anymore, making sure that everyone understands when someone gets onboarded, these are the data points that have to be put in from day one. And then these are optional ones based off of the conversations and understanding of where that client is or what their hobbies are, for example. But yeah, I've just found that having a resource like that internally just saves a lot of back and forth of, or even missing information, because a lot of times, we're busy, we're opening up lots of accounts, and some things can slip through the cracks. So having essentially a cheat sheet of these are the 10 to 15 things that we always ask when we onboard a new client, it just saves you so much time and emails back and forth. So definitely recommend that as well.
Yeah, and how do you help offices if they say, I have a client who's on a diet, or they are a big movie buff, or they just picked up pickleball, what are things, where would you suggest to put things like that?
Yep. So with those, I would suggest, there's a couple different sections. So if it's something that is really important that everyone needs to know, within Redtail, there's the important information section. What's great is that you put in just even one letter in there, and at the very top, it highlights and has a little red circle with an exclamation point. So that is great to be able to say, train your team when you come onto the contact record and you see that highlighted, make sure you click on it and it'll pop up the important information. That's a really great spot, especially if there's something very personal about the client that needs to be known amongst the team. Another area are, both with Wellfox and Redtail in particular, keywords and tags and custom fields. So within Redtail, they have the keywords and the user-defined fields. So those are located at the bottom of the contact record, but you can customize those. So a tag and a keyword to me is like more of like a true false, like is it applicable or not? Whereas a custom field or UDF within Redtail, what's great about that is that you can customize it. It could be a date, it could be a text format. So it just kind of depends on what kind of data you're trying to track. But what's great is that it's reportable. So you can then be able to grab people, whether it's a tag, keyword, or UDF, or custom field or tag in Wealthbox, to be able to have all that information. And then you can run reports and quickly be able to grab that information. But as Nora was saying earlier, if we don't utilize those features, it's really hard to now have to sit down and figure out who is appropriate for putting together this group. So being able to continually tag and use those keywords and use UDFs is really, really important. And so that's something where I always like to build within workflows and task templates and activity templates, having that queue to make sure that you are going back in and making those updates. So, during the onboarding process, making sure that you're tagging or putting on a keyword or a user-defined field at the appropriate time. So that way it just doesn't get missed, because those little details can, cost you a lot of time in the future. But if you're able to bake it into each of these different processes and really capturing it within the appropriate time period, it can just save you a lot of time.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. So So kind of like then the next kind of 2.0 of that, right? So we want to make sure we have that list of 10 to 15 really essential data points, for example. But then we want to really utilize technology to save you time, right? So making sure that you're able to, not have to spend that extra time of, keying in twice essentially. So really making sure that that information, whether it is in Precise FP or Wealthbox or Redtail or whichever platform you're using, what has been great is that all these technologies over the last, long time, but really recently, making sure that the integrations of the data is really trying to be pushed and pulled. I mean, we see all these AI note takers and all these other platforms that are really trying to make sure that the data is only keyed in once. And so really making sure that you're capitalizing on making sure the information is correct the first time. And so that way you can then push it through to the different systems. Making sure you have consistent naming. So, do we call it phone number? Do we call it phone? Do we call it mobile? Like, how do we want to distinguish those fields? So that way the information goes into the correct spot. And again, by utilizing software such as Precise FP and some others, you can really get a whole lineup of your advisor tech to take a lot of this key in and more administrative items off of your plate. So now we're going to spend some time on some use cases. So whenever I work with my clients, as I mentioned, we always do that health check. So similarly to going to the doctor, we want to make sure that we're taking a look at those duplicates and the contacts. I look at the database list, which is your menu in the back end. We want to make sure that there aren't a whole lot of overdue tasks or activities. And so that's something where during that exercise, we're able to really get a snapshot of what's going on in the system. So then from there, typically what I offer is then an implementation roadmap. So that way you can be able to leverage the system and fill in those gaps from the health check. So the three areas that I always like to focus on though, once I'm actually in the system, are prospecting, onboarding, and client review. So when I look at the CRM and I try and leverage each of the different features, I try and align them with the client journey. And so these are the three that I always focus on because every firm, prospecting is different for every firm, but everyone has to onboard. And then for the most part, everyone has to do some sort of a client review, again, depending on if you're doing hourly or AUM. But for the most part, most people fall into these three categories when they're working with their clients. So we're going to dive into prospecting first as far as a use case. So again, I really like to leverage not only the CRM. To me, yes, it's the hub. It should be the center of your entire practice. But to me personally, the CRM is only as powerful as the other technology that you're utilizing, because the CRM doesn't do everything. And there's definitely this, symbiotic relationship between all of these different tech partners and the CRMs, making sure that you can be able to link information. And so trying to leverage the right tech to make sure that you are only keying in once and then saving you time is critical. So for prospecting, when we think about prospecting, we're first reaching out to them or they're reaching out to us, and we need a way to be able to communicate with those individuals. So a lot of times what I notice is that people build out a Precise FP form, for example, and they put it on their website. What's great about that is that it's a form that's easy to use, it's customizable, it looks clean, it has your logo. But then when you key in the information, it goes directly to you. And then you're able to push that into the CRM and other systems. So the ones that I have listed here is like an intake form. So there's all of this stuff happening in the engine of Precise FP, which is why I love it, because it's able to push that information and take that load off of you. So by doing an intake form on your website, for example, you can gather all those essential data points that you need from the onset. Of course, you would do one, we'll go into the onboarding here momentarily, but you want just those key data points just to have that first conversation. And then you could be able to have that first call, like a discovery call or something like that, and utilize either, some sort of a calendaring software such as Jira Reminders or Calendly. But by doing that intake form, you can be able to get all of that basic information you need to be able to either research someone. A lot of times I'm building out these forms and we're trying to figure out what's their LinkedIn profile. Do they have a Facebook profile? Like, where do they work? What is their company like? So that way, when you come to the conversation, you feel empowered to have that conversation with them and learn more about them and what their needs are. But it feels more personal because you know a little bit more about them. What's also great is you can add them into your pipeline. Excuse me. You can add them into the pipeline within Precise FP. So you can track exactly where they are, within your sales pipeline. And then from there, what's really cool too, and this is probably my favorite part about Precise FP, is the data mapping. So as we were mentioning earlier, being able to push information and pull information. So you could be able to push all that information directly into the CRM. So you don't even have to key it in, right? So someone else keyed in their information, it comes into Precise FP, and it just gets pushed over into the CRM. Saves you time, saves your staff time, and all around is just a way better and more seamless, position that you're in. You're not having to worry about accidentally mistyping their name, for example, but really being able to just push all that information into the CRM. For example, you can push it into multiple platforms, but at this point, for this example, being able to push that in there can just save you a lot of time. So just less clicks, more ability to be able to leverage your expertise of actually preparing for the meetings, especially those discovery meetings. But yeah, so just really trying to make sure that you're mapping properly and have the forms that you need to be able to be successful. And then, from there, you can go into your CRM and then launch your workflow for all of that other prep. Nora, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, it's saving clicks is an understatement. Just if you were going to update someone's phone number in a record, you might have to go to their record, click edit, type in the number, hit save, go to the next one. That's a lot of typing, a lot of clicking where it can be done on your behalf. And I definitely want to talk about human connection for a second, where, what we're talking about is a perfect world scenario where you send this to your client or your prospect, they fill it out, they send it back to you in a nice, timely manner, and everything's good to go. But you might consider different service levels, or based on their comfort with technology, or just how you want to handle things as an office. I've seen human connection really be brought back into the process where you're actually filling it out on their behalf. And I've worked with a lot of offices that even like to start this in Precise FP. If you go into Precise AP, I can show this, but when you add someone new, it's just a one-page scroll of most of this essential information. And a lot of offices will like to just either be on the phone with their new prospect or in a meeting with them and just go down and fill in everything on their behalf. Two reasons this is good is, first, it's all in one page. You don't have to click on different tabs or anything, and it kind of condenses everything you need into one look. And then second is, once it's in Precise AP, then it's going to go to eMoney, then it's going to go to Redtail, then it's going to go to G Reminders. So it's really helpful in that aspect as well. But just some strategy here is really helpful. Your strategy of, what's the medium you're going to use? Are you going to send it to your client and be very clear and communicative and they'll fill it out? Or are you going to fill it out on their behalf? Are you going to jump on a Zoom and do that together? And then also just, your end goals of like, what do you want to do with this data? Where do you want it to go? What kind of services do you want to offer? Products, things like that. Keep that in mind as well. And just how much do you want to share at first? Some people might just want to give you a little bit of information at first, and you might need to build upon that.
Definitely. Well, speaking of building on that, we're going to go on to the client onboarding process. So exactly what Nora's talking about, making sure that you're getting at least those key data points from the beginning. So that way, when you have that discovery call or intro call, being able to have a good understanding of who they are, maybe what their interests are. I've seen a lot of people do that, like a pick list, and really making it so that way it aligns with what your services are. So that way you feel empowered coming into the meeting, knowing exactly that they need help with retirement or they need help with college planning. So being able to have those conversations from the get-go and understanding what their needs are, so that way you're not having to, utilize some of that time just to kind of get to the root of where or why they decided to have a call with you that day. So when we transition into onboarding, so as I mentioned, leveraging Precise FP, for example, within their pipelines and then those different forms, then you can be able to, once they give you that yes, right? So you have that discovery call and you determine that they want to move forward. then that's where we can really leverage Precise FP and push data to the max and go to all the different platforms, right? So just as Nora was describing, once they say yes, you can send out your client service agreement. You can then push the data into eMoney. You can then push even more information if you received any extra into the CRM, and then being able to go into Schwab and be able to launch paperwork. So really being able to automatically have all these things launched, so that way you're not having to click into every single platform and then having to key in all the other information. I mean, that's minutes, hours, weeks of information and time over a period of the year that you're having to use just to be able to get the information into the system in a way that you can then give it to this new client. And then being able to go into your CRM and just make sure that all of those different steps within your workflow are identified within the client onboarding. I always recommend to have a workflow just because there's multiple people involved. The way I describe a workflow is it's a string of tasks that are automatically being launched and being already pre-assigned to certain team members. So for client onboarding, as Nora mentioned, I mean, we always would love it to be a perfect world where we have, they sign the paperwork, we get the accounts open without any NIGOs, and we're well on our way, but usually that's not the case. So that's why with the workflows, yes, you have all those tasks strung together, but then you can utilize outcomes to repeat steps, to do follow-up, and really build in a whole system so that way you don't feel like you're having to manually track everything on a sticky note or an email or trying to figure out where you are within the system. You could be able to leverage your CRM to be able to track exactly where you are, how many follow-ups you've done, making sure that if it's time to resend that DocuSign or maybe give them a phone call for a little nudge to get that signed. That's the most critical aspect of it. So again, for onboarding, you just press a button and then it just flies into all these other softwares. So really being able to leverage that within Precise FP. Again, I love not only the data mapping, because I'd love to be able to map information between systems, but the fact that you could just push it into these other systems without having to utilize an external automation software, I think is just a great way to really utilize your time efficiently. Nora, anything
Yeah.
else about client onboarding before we jump into client reviews?
Yeah, it just makes me think, this is where your team is really on the clock, right? It's like somebody just hits the timer button and now your whole team is under a microscope. Your client is going to be noticing how delayed you are, how communicative you are, if there is any back and forth, if you're sending them, a fillable PDF and they are like, what is this? I'm supposed to send this securely through email. That's where your reputation is really getting established. So you want to be really sensitive to that experience here. And even when you are going to ask for referrals later, if you're sitting down with their client and you're like, I love working with you. I'm glad we've been able to accomplish so much. If you have anyone who's looking for an advisor, feel free to refer me. I think the first thing they're going to think about is their onboarding and how that went. So making this an all-star experience will really be able to give them the shine of when they do talk about you, they'll be able to tell their friend, you should work with this person because it was so easy, so seamless, and it's been able to help us a lot.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. All right, I will now jump into the annual review prep. So, I always say making sure that you're leveraging as much software as you can. You want to keep that tech stack relatively small just because you want to be able to leverage them. But what I love about Precise FP in particular is the fact that you can be able to connect to all these systems, and it checks a lot of boxes of what you are able to do within the system. You not only can you push information automatically, it's a great robust form generator. So you can be able to do a lot. You have your sales pipeline. So being able to utilize that to be able to then, take advantage of your other software is really critical. So when we kind of round out the 3 different client journey parts of the client experience, we look at annual reviews. So for me, whenever I look at a workflow and if someone that I'm working with uses Precise FP, there's usually 3 different steps that I always look at to make sure that the client review process is as seamless as possible. Now you can use other softwares to automatically do these things, such as Jira reminders. But today we're going to just focus on Precise FP and the CRM. So when we talk about the annual review prep, whether you're meeting with that group, annually or, semi-annually or even more frequently, having a system in place can really streamline the process and make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. And more importantly, a client doesn't slip through the cracks that is needing that client review, especially if you're managing their assets. So what I always recommend is to first start off really whiteboarding exactly what your client review process is. So, when you're scheduling, what does that look like? When you prepare for the meeting, what does that look like? And then what does follow-up look like? Are you using an AI note taker to push tasks, or are you taking notes manually and then having to input them into the CRM? Are you not doing that, or do you need a system like that? I mean, that's something I do help with my clients, is trying to figure out how can we build a system that works best for them. But really trying to figure out, when you first schedule, you want that to be its own workflow is typically how I recommend building it, just because the way that these workflows are structured is they're all time-based, right? So you can't really launch the whole annual review prep workflow for the event, for the actual meeting, if you don't know what that meeting date is. So at a bare minimum, I always say have two workflows. So you have one to schedule. So again, it just kind of depends on how you run your business. So it might be something where you're sending out a broadcast email to all the people that are AAAs, and you want to make sure that they get the scheduling link and get onto your calendar. So again, going very back to the beginning of our presentation, having that clean data is critical. Being able to know who is a single, a double, or AAA is going to make your annual review prep that much more seamless. You can quickly run a quick list, like in Redtail, for example, grab all those people, send out a broadcast email, have your scheduling link right there. And then all of a sudden, instead of reaching out to 10, 15, 20, 100 people, you send out one email, and then they have the link, and then they're able to get onto your calendar. And so really that workflow really empowers your team to understand what are the steps that you do for scheduling. So sending out that broadcast email, making sure that no one got missed, making sure that everyone did actually schedule. And then from there, that's when, once they actually have launched it, so that's more of an internal kind of workflow, is to make sure everyone is scheduled. But then I always say to have the actual client, prep and then follow up workflow separately within each of their contact records for the household. So within there, I always say within that workflow, when you're doing the prep, yes, you're going into eMoney, MoneyGuide Pro, you're going into Precise FP, you're going into YCharts, you're going into whichever software, right, that you have all your information in. You're checking the custodian for RMD updates and that sort. So I know you're doing all of that prep, and it's great to have all of that information together. But one thing that I feel like is missed by a lot of advisors, but could be really utilized within Precise FP, is sending out essentially a pre-meeting checklist or verification form. So a lot of times, we get into a meeting and we recognize that they moved, or that there's a new phone number, or there's a new family member. So what I always recommend is creating a Precise FP form that you send out maybe a week, 2 weeks, depending on how much time you want to give your clients, but something where you can already pre-fill. So again, this is what's so cool about the technology. You can pre-fill this form with all of their information, their current phone numbers, their current addresses, any other details that you want to have, and send it to them and say, hey, we're meeting in a week. I just want to make sure there's no updates. But if there is, I would love to hear it. And I'd love for you to update this form, so that way we have your latest information. It saves you so much time. You're not having to follow up with the person, try and get that information. You're also not having to worry about halfway through the call recognizing that they needed something else, or, oh, we need to change accounts, or, you're able to be ahead of it and be more proactive with that relationship. And again, to Nora's point, if you're wanting to really build your business around referrals, I mean, how great of a way is it to be proactive with your clients and making sure that they feel like you're always thinking about them, you're being proactive, you want to have that client review meeting to be as fruitful as possible. And so by utilizing a Precise FP form in that instance really gives you a leg up. And so you feel like you have all that information. Plus, if you can get it before the meeting, you're already updating, you can push that information back into the CRM. So that way, when you meet with them, everything is up to date and you're able to feel confident with that clean data. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning of our call, instead of having to go in and look at your entire book of business, and it can be very daunting to say, how am I going to get these 100 phone numbers? I don't have the time. I have to go get someone else to do this. Whereas if you just meet with everyone And as you meet with them, have this form, fill out the information for you and fill it out. Over the year, you'll be able to make sure that all that information is up to date and clean. And so, yeah, so really just making sure you're leveraging that, and then you have your meeting, and then within the workflow within your CRM, just making sure that any other prep is completed. And then again, if you're using other technology, you can be able to launch tasks and workflows, for example. But if not, you can just keep following your internal workflow and then assign those tasks manually for follow-up. So we recognize during the meeting that John Smith has retired, so therefore we're going to, maybe see if there's an opportunity to roll over his 401k into our business. Oh, looks like he's now a grandfather. Let's send them a gift, so that way when the new, when the new baby comes, we have that, we have a newborn gift that we always give out. So something like that, where you're able to add that client service by being proactive and understanding exactly what that relationship looks like. But then being able to use those tasks within the CRM, you can assign it to the correct person, give it a due date, and make sure that you stay in line with what you need to get done and accomplished. And then you just do this all over again the following year or semi-annually or whatever cadence that they're on. But again, just trying to really utilize the software to do a lot of that admin and just manual type of work. So that way you can do it. You all are wanting to do it, especially in this industry, is to work with your clients. You want to be in front of them. You want to be able to provide that great service, and be able to take all of this other stuff off of your plate. So Nora, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but
Yeah, I
I'll kind
think
of
that's
round it
that's
out.
really helpful to just think of it as a living, breathing process too.
Mm-hmm.
Of you might start off sending out the calendar link a month before, but you realize, okay, 6 weeks is better. And you might find that different people are more responsive and you might have to call this person. You could then go in your CRM and add that as, an important information of, they don't really respond to the scheduling link. We usually have to follow up with a phone call. But the more that you add and your team adds, it's kind of like a piggy bank that just keeps getting filled up with a wealth of knowledge. And then your service automatically is going to get better with that, everyone understanding the last interaction that someone had with your brand.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Yeah, so to round out the conversation today, so cleaning up your CRM, why it matters. Pretty much been the theme of this entire presentation of clean data means smooth workflows and better client service. And so, with having those custom forms, what's great is that it pushes that information. You're not having to worry about, keystrokes being incorrect and mistyping. And so really just being able to simplify within the Precise FP forms can just really be able to help you add to that proactive client service. Yep, so essentially kind of just to finish up, where I come in is really with that strategy, the data mapping, workflows, and other CRM features. So yeah, so next steps would just be if you wanted to reach out, more than happy to have a free 30-minute conversation with you to see how I can support you. If you do want help with building out Precise FP forms, which is a service that I do offer, just mention that you were part of this webinar, and I'd be happy to kick in a $100 discount into that. But yeah, so I'll send this presentation out. I'll give it to Nora, and she'll be able to take it. But Nora, I'm more than happy to have you jump into the chat and see if there's any questions, and spend the next 10-15 minutes on that.
Yeah, that's so timely because I know Ian was saying, will you please share your contact information? So all of
Doing
that
up.
information, all of that is here. And I will mention that Stephanie does a really good job at kind of separating the time that's spent in different systems as well. Right now, your office might be logging in and spending a lot of time in a lot of places, where Stephanie might kind of divide and conquer and say, okay, you as an advisor, I only want you to log into the CRM and look at your to-do items for today and look at some reporting so you can make some informed business decisions, and then kind of turn it to operations and say, operations, I want you to really look at this process. Let us know how we can improve it. So I think she really does a really good job of that. So that way each group can protect their time and the whole team can be more productive.
Yep. No, exactly. Yeah, I have a role-based approach to it. So exactly what Nora was saying, making sure, as an advisor, you're spending time with your clients and not feeling bogged down and really leveraging your team to be able to utilize the system. But real quick, going back to clean data, it's not only clean data for the actual information, but then, contact information, but also for like the workflows and such, because then the advisors, and ownership can come in and be able to see within a matter of seconds where you are within a workflow, be able to see those bottlenecks. So I really enjoy looking at like the business intelligence side of things. So taking a step back at the 30,000-foot view and say, okay, what's going on with our prospecting process? So like dashboards and Wealthbox are a great way to do that. You can be able to build those different widgets and see where are the bottlenecks. So, okay, within our workflow, looks like step number 6 seems to just like we have a lot of people stuck there. What's happening? Why can't we push them to the next step? So then you're able to kind of go back into your processes, figure out what those bottlenecks are, clear them up, and then you're able to be more efficient.
Yes, and two things I'll mention about the forms, the custom precise IP forms. First is you might have something that you love already. You might have a fillable PDF that you love. You might have a pen and paper set of information that you like to collect that you want to be mimicked exactly, but you don't really have the time and the resources to go in and do it yourself. Stephanie, you could just hand that over to her. She could jump in your system and build it on your behalf. And then also just strategically, I've always heard this be referred to as an operations test. Your operations team is the one that's going to then take that information or take that meeting and then start to do things with it, like open up accounts and go from there, make trades. I know Stephanie was doing that a lot. So you might want to set your operations team up for success by empowering them to say, okay, you're going to have to do all of the other stuff. So let's make the precise FP form look exactly the way you need it. And I'm talking even the order of the fields. If your operations team then puts it somewhere where phone number is before address, Stephanie can help to arrange that on their behalf so that way they're ready to go in the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, and I have a question from George. George is saying, can you share a bit about when you should use a tag versus a custom field in Wealthbox, and what data should be entered at the household level versus the individual levels?
Yeah, I get these questions a lot. So the tag within Wealthbox compared to like a custom field, so I kind of mentioned it before. To me, a tag is like a true false kind of question. Like, is it valid? Is it not valid? And then with tags within Wealthbox, also the client segmentation is also a great use of it. Whereas a custom field, the reason why you would use it is if you want to have like a pick list or a date or it's some other type of variable that you want to be tracking. Last meeting date is another popular one. So trying to track the information into different ways, like tags. Most important ones are client service within Wealthbox, client service, any sort of attributes that they have. And then like for Wealthbox, because I like it there versus other places, is if it's like do not call, like only email or vice versa. That's a great way to use the tag. Whereas the custom field, if it's like a pick list, so for instance, if they have different client servicing, relationships that you have. So for instance, if they're financial planning and AUM, it's nice to have that as a pick list. So you have financial planning and AUM only, financial planning only. That'd be a great use of a custom field. And then, like I said, the last meeting date is another really popular one. So if you just want more of a variable, that's when you would use a custom field versus a tag. Now, when we talk about the contact creation, whether it's a contact or a household, rather, the type, I always say, head of household should have a majority of the information. The system was built to go up. So you have the head of household and then you have the co-client, the spouse. But all that information and even, anyone that's part of the household, so even kids, but all of that information flows up into the household. So the household is a great way to look as far as what's holistically happening. What are all the notes? What tasks occurred for that? So especially when we talk about client reviews, because as you probably know, when you go in there, the contact page has a lot of information that you can fill out. But for the household, like you can't do addresses. It's very limited on what you can do. So I always say, depending on how you're doing the reporting, try and have as much stuff as you can at the head of household level. But when we're trying to run reports on client servicing, you could use the household. But it's funny, a lot of times when we talk about where do we want data, I hate saying it, but it really depends, because certain firms, like household is the way that they do their processes, and that's how it's all centered around that. I personally say go to head of household. It gives you the most versatility and it flows up. But some people like to go the household route. So hopefully those answers were suffice for you.
Really helpful. Thank you. Another question, how are you able to link to Schwab? The link to Schwab is very interesting. I would say it's like two level. First, it's going to link to Schwab Advisor Center. So most of the key fields will move from P into Schwab Advisor Center, eliminate that rekeying, that data entry. And the second part is for account opening. A lot of the account forms are going to be located in P as PDFs. So then you could fill the information that you have in P into those PDFs, and then you could send it, if you use DocuSign, you could send it to DocuSign, which will then go to the client and then go to Schwab automatically for processing, or you can just bundle it up with other RIA account forms that you have and send it to them. But that'll be the Schwab integration, and it's just a matter of putting in your credentials, and that would be set up. And then Dawn said exactly how can we feed info from Precise to CRM? And same thing, your first step is to go to the integrations page, make sure it's set up. Most of the time it's just login credentials. And then your second step is then to go to an account in Precise and use the export button. If you click export, it'll go ahead and give you a list of your integrations. You would then choose your CRM and it would take the 100+ fields automatically mapped and move it into the CRM and either create a record for someone who's new or update a record if they already exist in your CRM. So that's really helpful to make sure that duplicates don't end up happening. And then another question says, or we use Precise templates for onboarding and annual review, but don't know how to do it automatically and not manually. So that's going to be something where you're going to want to coordinate with their workflows where, maybe within the workflow, you would have a step that says to send the pre-filled fact finder over to your client. But right now there wouldn't be a way that would automatically happen. It would still be a manual process. Question says best practice for flagging employee accounts in the CRM, also definition of employee accounts.
You want to take this one or do you want me to?
So is I don't know if that means like your AUM accounts for your employees.
Like if
If
you're
you want to
managing
take
those
the time.
accounts?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, when you have the context within the system, so I mean, when we talk about, I'll kind of use the two terms. So for red tail, you want to, you have the status of the category. So I always say, the status, for employees, I always just have that as a separate one as a status. And then contact type, I always have that as employee over in Wolfbox. But as far as to tag those accounts, under that, there's no way to add like a tag to notate if they're an employee account or not. It just simply is within the contact record, and when you link the account, you'll be able to see it. So if you don't want to share, so I mean, typically what I see is in this instance, it's more of a permissions issue. So what we can do, you want to set the permissions, like for Redtail, for example, you can set permissions on who can actually see those contacts. So what I typically see is, let's say we have 6 employees, only the owner can see each of those 6 employees' contact records, which then will feed into not being able to see those accounts.
Yeah, very important to make sure that's set up, right?
Yep.
Kate has a good question. Is there such a thing as too much information?
I think yes, I think so. I'm all about having it be as concise as you need. So just trying to, again, kind of similar, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the call, I always recommend having that short list of those key data points that you're always trying to track. I mean, you always have to have those essential data points, right? Contact information, client servicing. But then it really depends on what do you need to function to be able to leverage your information to apply that client service to them. So if you need to have information about their interests because you guys are holding a event or something like that, you need to know that information. But you don't, some people do track their pets' names, some don't. I think it's really a case by case basis, and it depends on how much information that you guys need to have because with it's kind of with great responsibility, you have to make sure that you have all that information and it's more to clean up. So similar to a
Yeah.
house, you want to make sure that whatever you have in there, you want to make sure it's cleaned up and it stays concise. So I mean, me with my two kids, I'm always trying to take as much stuff out of the house as I can and then go to Goodwill because I want to make sure all the information, all the stuff that's in here is being utilized, and then anything that's not, you take it out. So similarly to with CRM, you want to make sure that you're really utilizing the information that's in there, and then anything that's old or not, you archive it. And if you really need to save it, you can save it in external resources. But that would be,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say just get it as concise as you can in the data that you're really trying to track. So that way you're not bombarded by all this extra fluff within the system.
Yeah, great point. Another great question. How do you decide what information and workflows should move from your old CRM to your new one?
Yep. So when I do a lot of CRM migration support, we usually have a project scope call where we just go through exactly those different processes that you have and then figure out like, are you actually using them? And we go through the different steps. So that way, when we build them out into the new systems, that they're being efficient. A lot of times when I meet with people, we go through the steps and we identify that, these workflows were maybe assigned to old team members or that there is a whole new process because you brought in this whole new tech. Especially when we're talking about different portfolio management softwares, they have different steps. So we want to make sure that each of those steps are as up to date as possible. So we kind of do a cleanup of just what those steps are. And a lot of times too, we just identify what needs to be built out and not. I mean, a lot of these CRMs, you have to build these things from scratch. So that's where I'm able to come in. The data migration is done by the CRM systems in those companies, whereas then I'm able to come in and build out those templates and the reports. But from my experience with other advisors, what I typically do is not only do I take what you currently have, but then I provide you recommendations saying, hey, did you actually think about when you go from this step to this step, you're actually having to go back and do follow up, or hey, did you think about, yeah, sure, 99% of the time you're doing that e-signature, but for that one wet signature, you want to make sure that you get that medallion and like all these different things that from my experience in operations, financial planning, and then others being a consultant, really making sure that it's cohesive and making sure that those steps are all, exactly what you need. So we kind of do this like cleanup. So I always say try and do as much cleanup before a migration for data, but then I come in and try and do the same kind of scrub of your processes to make sure that when we build them out into your new CRM, they're clean, they're exactly what you need. So that way you and your team can just hit the ground running once the data comes in.
Mhm. Great point. Ashley's asking, is there a way to upload the info from PreciseIP to automatically integrate into Redtail? Right now, they fill out the info and we manually input into Redtail. And yeah, that's exactly what PreciseIP is taking off of your plate is either you're filling it out on PreciseIP or your client is filling it out on PreciseIP, and then it's sending into Redtail, integrating into Redtail, and creating records or updating records. So you do not manually have to input anything anymore. It would all be sent over through the integration. So definitely check it out. There's a free trial available at preciseip.com. You can turn on that integration, you can do some testing and make sure that it's a good fit, but you'll be able to save a lot of time and a lot of NIGOs from rekeying
Yes.
in multiple places.
Yep. Exactly. Awesome.
Awesome. Well, that is all the questions that I had. I know we're at the top of our time here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. Everyone is giving lots of thank yous in the chat as well. We appreciate all of your interactions, all of your questions, and if you have any follow-up, definitely reach out and we're more than happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks much, Nora. Thanks everyone for joining today.
All right. Have a good day, everyone. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.